Awesome.
All right. Get on here a few minutes early.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. People are jumping on.
Yep. Get started here in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
All right, looks like we got some familiar faces.
Yeah.
I see Barry, Annalise, Scott Greneau. All right, this will be good.
Yeah, good morning.
Hey Becky, we should have got some elevator music.
Yeah.
You missed out.
Yep.
Waited too long.
I mean, we can just start humming, you know, if we really wanted to.
Good. Yeah.
Do the Jeopardy hum, Matthew.
Like
Too much of my childhood watching that. Yeah. For a second, I couldn't remember it. I was like, oh no.
Well, all right. Well, it's 10 o'clock. I think we go ahead and get started. So, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's last webinar of our series. This is all about where have the ditches gone, the Valley of Bioswales as stormwater detention features. This is a 3-part online series for low impact development, and we really want to thank our sponsors for today's webinar, including the US EPA, Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Natural Resources, Beaver Water District, and thanks to you all at Construction EcoServices for being our guest speakers today as well. So, all right, so I'm your host, Becky Rowark. I'm a program director with Beaver Watershed Alliance. We're located in the Northwest Arkansas area here in Springdale, Arkansas. And today we are joined by Anthony Kendrick, who's a project manager at Construction EcoServices based in New Orleans, Louisiana. And we also have Matthew Smith, who's a business development with Construction EcoServices out of the Houston, Texas office. So just a few housekeeping notes. Hi. So just a few housekeeping notes to engage with us today during the presentation. So somewhere on your screen, you're going to see the Q&A and the chat features. So feel free to use those features to ask us questions. So throughout the presentations, we'll see those questions and we'll try to answer as many as possible during today's program. Also, this webinar will be recorded and it is available on demand. So if you missed something or you need to go back and reference something, that will also be available. And we just want to thank all of you for participating in today's online event. We really appreciate you being here and your interest in low impact development. If you do want a certificate of completion for professional development hours, let us know. And after this webinar, we can get with you and help you get a certificate. So with that, I'll start us off with a little bit about the Beaver Watershed Alliance. And I apologize if you've been on these series, you've had to see this the past 2 times, but just for those of you who haven't been here yet, a little bit about the Beaver Watershed Alliance. So our mission here in the Northwest Arkansas area is to proactively protect, enhance, and sustain water quality in the Beaver Lake area and the integrity of its watershed. And we accomplish our mission throughout the entire watershed area through a variety of activities and working with thousands of volunteers and landowners each year. We implement best management practices in both urban areas and on farms, all to improve water quality. We also work with a number of partner agencies to conduct scientific analysis and research within this watershed to learn about water quality trends and to help prioritize our work. So here you see this is the White River watershed area. And basically watersheds are defined by topography. So, and they're kind of like nesting eggs. There's watersheds within watersheds, and they all drain to a specific point. So in this case, the White River is draining to the Arkansas River, or I'm sorry, the Mississippi River on the far east corner of Arkansas. And the Beaver Lake watershed is in the headwaters of the White River system. So Beaver Lake is one of the 3 impoundments that were built for flood control back in the 1960s. So it starts, the headwaters start here in Northwest Arkansas. They go into Table Rock Lake, Bull Shoals Lake, and they flow all the way down to the Mississippi River. And then that goes down to the Gulf of Mexico. And why is Beaver Lake important to us? Well, it is our primary drinking water source for 1 in 6 Arkansans. It provides hydroelectric power, brings in millions in recreation and tourism, and it really has been a cornerstone of the economic growth happening here in Northwest Arkansas. So last we checked, there was about 30 people moving here per day. So our population is encroaching, if not surpassing, about 500,000 people. So the Beaver Lake watershed is also a state priority watershed. It has tributaries that are listed on the 303D list. That means they don't meet their designated use. So there's currently 5 stream breaches that are listed as impaired. And part of that impairment is caused by sediment. Sediment is the #1 source of pollution in this watershed. At the top right, you'll see this is pretty common in this area. This is stream bank erosion, and it is currently the highest contributor to sediment. And below that is also the urban runoff, and a lot of sediment comes from development in our urban areas. And dirt roads also contribute to this sediment issue and challenge that we're facing in this watershed. Low density development and loss of pasture land and forest, that's also expected to contribute to the sediment loads as we build and grow here in this region, especially in the western parts of the watershed. So that's really why it's important for us to focus on reducing rain runoff anywhere, anytime we can. Slow down that rain, soak it in on site, decentralize it. And anytime that we can use nature to design and build our cities, we can prevent or reduce some of these environmental impacts that are downstream. So many communities are turning to low impact development and green infrastructure to solve these water problems, especially ways to handle these more intense rainfall events. You know, we used to get 3 inches over a day. Now we're getting 3 inches of water in an hour. So we're having really intense rainfall events. We received a grant back in 2017 to install 3 low impact development parking lots in 3 different locations, including an urban park, a boat launch, and a rural community park. And Anthony and Construction EcoServices has been a part of helping us with those designs. We're working with Craft and Toll. They did the actual designs, and they're going to be installed this year. So we want to thank our many partners of the Beaver Watershed Alliance. We are a small organization, but we're really proud of the level of support of our community and our state and our federal program partners that help protect and conserve our natural resources. So we are an alliance, and these are the many different groups that we work with here in Arkansas. Okay, so I'll hand this off over to Anthony, who's going to share all about the stormwater detention. And then after that, Matthew Smith is going to share some of the things that he's working on. And again, if you're just joining us, please feel free to answer or to ask questions throughout this webinar with the Q&A feature down at the bottom. Also, at the end of this program, we'll end at 11:30, but we do plan to stick around for a few minutes and just answer any last questions. So with that, Anthony, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, Becky, thank you very much. All right, guys, so we're on the last webinar here of the series. So it's kind of nice we get to wrap up on talking about bioswales. So if you know anything about me, one of my favorite stormwater BMPs is bioswales. They're always fun to work with. Everybody likes them. This is one of my favorite ones. This is one up in North Texas where we get a lot of good wildflowers and it gets growing during this time of year. And these bioswales are great. They don't always have to look magnificent like this one. They could be simple. They could be low maintenance, but they can also be, planted with native plants. And the good thing about bioswales is they serve multi-purposes. So we could use it for detention, water quality, conveyance, and then aesthetics. So there's all different types of features that we get from bioswales. And when I first started getting into the stormwater game, when it came to construction, I remember talking to my boss and he was telling me, hey, we want you to go preach the word about loan pack development and basically convince engineers and cities that it's the right thing to do and that's the future of stormwater management. And so, I always think about these reasons why we want to do loan pack development. Water quality was big for me. Prevents erosion, mitigates flash flooding, mimics nature. It just seems like something that we want to do. And the challenge with this is, you can have all these great reasons and to use this type of stormwater design, but not always what ends up going down, because at the end of the day, do developers really care about these reasons, right? Do they really care that we're going to be cleaning the water, we're going to be doing this aesthetically pleasing stormwater management design? And so what we've kind of realized over the years is, trying to convince someone to do things for the right reason, it doesn't always work out better because you really can't communicate the value of that to who you're selling it to, whether it's a municipality or a developer, whoever it may be. And so my boss actually came up with this golden circle idea that he got from a TED Talk, and we've kind of applied this this concept to selling this idea of loan pack development as it pertains to stormwater management. And if you look at the golden circle, I'll kind of briefly explain it, but you can go online. I believe Simon Sinek has some great videos on it. But really what it does is it kind of focuses, instead of looking at on the outside and then going on your end when it talks about the circle, a lot of times when we're trying to sell something to somebody, we always focus about deliverables, right? Like, what are we selling it to? How are we going to sell it? So what are our beliefs behind this product or this idea? And then hardly do we ever get to why we're doing it, right? We're just more focusing on the deliverables. We're focused on the outside of the golden circle. So what we try to do with the golden circle is flip it out. So whenever you are trying to sell an idea, you should really focus on the vision first, right? Because if you get somebody focusing on the vision, you're going to grab their attention better, and then they're going to really see the value of doing that. And so with the golden circle, the whole idea is that you focus on the why first. You focus on your vision. Then you explain the how or the beliefs. And then at the very end, you start getting to the deliverables, right? And so we'll talk about how we can do this with stormwater management, especially when it relates to developers. That's kind of been our big, our audience when we're trying to sell this idea. But I think a lot of municipalities really already know about this, why loan pack development is so great. But they also struggle too, trying to get developers on board with new zoning requirements and new stormwater ordinances. Is a lot of times developers throw up things like a maintenance and cost, and so instead of focusing on those deliverables, let's focus on the vision. So we must start with why, right? Developers don't always care about the deliverables up front. Later on they're going to want to know what those are, but up front they're more focusing on on things that are important to them, especially the bottom line. And we're always trying to talk about what the deliverables are when it comes to stormwater management, right? You always want to show these great photos of these stormwater bioswales, BMPs, whatever they are, and how great they look and what it's done for the community. But when you're talking about implementing a project early on, focusing on these kind of things can be kind of scary, because if you look at this roadway planner on Bagby Street, first thing a developer might think of is, well, what's that going to cost on maintenance? What kind of budget do I need to do for maintenance? And same for municipalities. If they look at a roadway project, they see this large bioswale, they're like, well, how are we going to maintain that? Do we have the infrastructure and the crews to do that? So instead of focusing on all the good benefits and the deliverables for your stormwater BMPs, let's talk about the why vision, right? And whether it's doing rainwater harvesting or bioswales, underground detention, things like that, we want to start focusing on the why. Developers really care about why they should do it, right? And so if you want to implement this type of stormwater design, these are the language, or I guess the bullet points of the language that you want to speak to the developer, right? So why would you want to implement a bioswale or permeable pavement on your project? Well, if you can tell your developer that you can increase your lot yield, that's going to get their attention. If we can lower the overall cost of development over traditional stormwater design, that'll also get their attention. And if they can use these tools to increase their overall revenue of the project, well, yeah, that's definitely going to grab their attention, and they're going to start looking at this rather than the deliverables. And then always the construction delays and design delays are always important, but those first 3 bullet points is really what you want to get across when you're trying to implement this on a new customer or a new city. So here's our little I guess our tagline we like to use with low impact development. We wanted to provide developers with a water management solution that positively impacts their bottom line. Through creativity, innovation, and collaboration, together we can build a better future. And collaboration is really important, right? Because when you're trying to implement these projects, it's always good to definitely get everybody on board and see that. And a lot of times when we work with landscape architects or engineers, those two kind of work hand in hand when you're looking at stormwater management design. So let's bring it back to why we're talking about bioswales so much. So this is where I grew up. I grew up in North Texas, about an hour north of Dallas. And the neighborhood I lived in was pretty much like every other neighborhood in that area, where everything was gravity drained through these bar ditches. There was no really storm drainage pipe. And so in our front yard, we had this really big ditch. And whenever it would rain, we'd get big, heavy rains, that ditch would fill up with water. And I could just see it go down, and you can kind of see it all flow down to the low point of the neighborhood. But what's interesting is that ditch would stay full of water until the next day. It wouldn't just drain after the rain event. It would take a day or two to eventually drain out into the lake or the creek, wherever it went. And the reason is because if you look, a lot of these driveways have culverts, and the culverts a lot of times end up restricting the flow. And so what happens is the ditches pretty much work like micro detention areas. A lot of these culverts end up getting silted in or damaged, and so it's usually almost like having a 6-inch restrictor between each ditch. And so what's interesting about that pretty much was a low impact development design, right? That was kind of like the way that they were doing it back then in the 80s when they developed those. And now if you go back and look at all of the neighborhoods, especially in the Texas area and all across the United States, you don't see ditches very often, right? They've kind of gone away with those. And so the question asks, where did the ditches go? And the reason we got rid of ditches, right, is to increase efficiency, but really was lot yield, right? If you can get rid of that ditch, you can get more lots on your land. And so what that did for the developers was they saw the value of paying for underground storm drainage, because they can get more homes, they can sell more lots and increase their revenue. But, what happens when you increase your impervious area and basically try to get all the stormwater off your site as soon as you can to the nearest creek and let the downstream neighbor deal with it? Well, you get urbanized flooding, right? And in Houston, they get tons of flooding. I think they name all their flood events after the nearest holiday that it's around, whether it's Memorial Day holiday or the tax day flood. And all across the United States, we're really seeing the issue of urban flooding become more prevalent, more common. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we were wanting to, expand, urbanize, and develop as much as we can. So what was the solution to urbanized flooding? Well, it was detention ponds, right? And if you go on a Google map and look at a lot of subdivisions, you'll see these large detention ponds. We've gotten creative throughout the years. We've also made them retention ponds and made them aesthetic features. But at the end of the day, you're having to take a huge chunk of your land, convert it over to a detention feature, and then you're going to have to maintain it. And detention ponds, even though a lot of people think that they're one of the more economical ways to manage stormwater on an upfront cost, long term they can be a big maintenance burden for the developers, especially in areas where they're actually enforcing maintenance and they're coming out and inspecting these stormwater ponds. It could be a long-term maintenance burden for your owners. And so you get these detention ponds, and if you look at this lot, for a developer, what they see is they see a missed opportunity. They can put more homes. They can get more lots on this property if they didn't have that detention pond in the way. And so there are different ways that we can address stormwater management than just curb and gutter, drainage pipes, and then a big pond where we can stack that water so we don't flood our downstream neighbor. And so what we found is, breaking up that detention area, using our existing right-of-ways, using our existing landscape for stormwater management can be a more economical solution. And Matthew will talk about this project later on, but it's a great little aerial view of this big subdivision down near Houston, where they use these large bioretention basins for their stormwater management. And Matthew will talk about the economics and the lot yield later on, but I'm pretty sure most people could agree that they'd rather live in a neighborhood that looks like this than the ones I kind of showed you earlier. Because if you look here, there are no subsurface drainage pipes, there's no curb and gutter. They do have underground infrastructure for like the overflow, as you can see there in the corner of the bioretention basin, but the curb and gutter design went away because now they have these nice bioretention basins or bioswales, whatever you want to call them, to manage their stormwater runoff. And so if you've watched any of our other presentations the last 2 weeks, we've talked about this multifunctional design concept where we're using our landscape to manage both of our stormwater and our aesthetic features. All right, so before I get started, we got one question here. This is from Dana. How is wildflower bioswales in North Texas maintained? Is it ever mowed? I know in that particular area, they just will mow it once the wildflowers start to die off. But yeah, they just kind of let them grow wild. A lot of the seeds, they might have seeded that bioswale because before it was all just grass. And then I came back a couple years later and it was covered in wildflowers. So I imagine they seeded it. But yeah, mowing is just a pretty straightforward regimen for those types of landscape. All right, we're going to go through some of these case studies here about multifunctional design and how we can bring down the economics with this. So why low impact development? So this particular project was a small subdivision in Houston, and these were pretty high-end homes. So you can see these are pretty large footprints of homes. And this one in particular was 2 cul-de-sacs here. And you can see there wasn't that many lots on here. There's maybe 20 lots total. But even though it was a small lot, the city was still going to require them to do detention, right? So they're going to have to detain a lot of the stormwater runoff coming off these big lots and the pavement. And so this was kind of like the final design solution. And so what you're looking at here is in front of all these lots in the frontage, basically the front yard of these homes, they were going to have these small micro detention areas that were going to be drained and all connected together through bioretention. And so originally, lot 4 and 5 here on the right side was going to be allocated to basically a surface pond or a detention feature. And the developer was obviously worried about this because they were selling these individual lots for over 300 grand. So they're almost looking at $700,000 in lost revenue that they were going to have to allocate to a stormwater management feature. And by doing these micro detention areas in front of the lots and manipulating the hydrology, so instead of all that water racing off the lots, off the road into one detention feature, they were able to slow it down. And whenever you slow down that the time of concentration, you actually end up decreasing your peak flow. So in this situation, they weren't going to have to detain as much water because they were slowing down the water enough that they didn't have to sit there and stack it up in a big pond. And if you look out in front of these lots, what was really cool is not every home looks the same. So some of these were landscaped per the homeowner. Some of them were kind of xeriscaped where we didn't use a lot of vegetation, while others, you know, they did some extensive vegetation out here. And these look really great. And I believe each of the homeowners or the HOA is responsible for maintaining these. So these actually are permitted through the county or the city, and they have to be, the permit has to be renewed every year. So there is ongoing maintenance, but it's pretty much no different than what you'd see with typical landscape. You know, obviously they're going to be looking for signs of erosion. They're going to be looking for ponding water in these bioretention areas, but at the end of the day, they're really not doing too much different maintenance schedule than they would be whether it was a landscaped front yard. And you can see here, this homeowner ended up opting for just a gravel bioretention basin. But there is, in each of these, there is a bioretention system that has your engineered soil, your bridging stone, and your under drain that actually acts as a restrictor for your flow, so you can get your surface attention, and it also provides water quality. But in this situation, what's interesting is the city wasn't requiring them to do this because of water quality. They did it for flood reasons, right? So the great thing about low impact development is you don't always have to do it because of a water quality standard. You can do it just because it's a more effective and effective method of managing runoff. And we've also seen this on some small commercial lots. So we've done quite a few of these medical facilities in Harris County. And what's great about these is they were able to take advantage of combining BMPs, of doing permeable pavement and bioswales. So again, you know, the low impact development, or I guess the reason to do this wasn't water quality. It wasn't to meet some lead requirement. They weren't trying to get a tax incentive. There was no rebates. It all came down to, it was just a cheaper and better solution than an underground detention system. Because you notice in a lot of urban developments, they don't really have a lot of room for surface ponds anymore. And so everybody's been putting their stormwater underground. And in this particular project, they were going to develop 2 phases. So they had the first phase, and then they had the second phase. And so they were going to have to provide detention on both of these developments. And when they were looking at the cost of it, it was going to be pretty significant, right? So kind of hard to see, but if you look in the bottom right, the detention phase for volume 1 and 2 looked like it was almost 30,000 cubic feet. You know, the detention requirements in Harris County and Houston are pretty stringent. So the value of cutting down that cost for developers is very important. And so you're looking at $260,000 price tag for just a traditional underground detention system. And so when we were working with the engineer, they asked us, you know, they priced out an underground detention system, and they said, hey, you know, if we might have some room in the landscape for surface detention. Do you think we could implement bioswales? And so we kind of helped them come up with a little bit of a solution where they were able to take the sheet drainage off the street and the building itself, and it all kind of funneled down to a bioswale. You can kind of see, you know, and one of the challenges in Harris County is everything's so flat. So it does make it difficult to use landscape as detention when everything's so flat. It's kind of hard to build up your landscape to get that positive drainage. And you can see here, you're getting some sediment back up and the inlet here, but you know, with a little bit of maintenance that can be taken care of. But what's really great about this project is the bioswale kind of wraps around the building, and they use a combination of just a dry river rock bed, and then they got plants scattered throughout here. But what you're seeing here is just their surface detention just kind of broken up and wrapped around the building. And they got some weeds growing through some of this rock. And one thing you'll notice about anytime you use rock in the kind of the low point of a swale or a bioswale, it'll eventually get sediment in there, and they'll start getting grass in there. So if you really want to keep that rock look, you know, you will have to do some type of landscape fabric underneath it, and then keep the weeds out of there. But again, that's all maintenance that can be done through your typical landscape maintenance company. And then what you're looking at here, this is actually the bioretention system. So this is a high flow biofiltration system where all the water eventually makes it to this biofilter. it restricts the flow, right? So you can only get so much water through that engineered soil, which then drains to this overflow structure. And so during a big rain event, you'll get surface storage between the elevation of this inlet, which sits up high on the swell, and then the bottom of the swell there. So maybe you're getting a foot of storage throughout that swell. And so that's where they're getting their detention volume. And on the second phase of development, they took a combination. They didn't have as much land or landscape to do a bioswale to wrap around the building. So what you're seeing here is the blue line, or the blue rectangle you see here on the left, that's actually just the parking stalls. So I forgot how many parking stalls they had there, but the red line is the actual footprint of the entire parking lot. So that includes your drive aisle, you got your dumpster pad there and your entrance. So what we did was we broke up the storage through the surface in the bioswale. And then what we also did was that red footprint you see there was all an aggregate base. So generally that could be 12 inches, 2 foot of stone bed. And then traditional concrete was poured over that. And then in the blue area, we had our permeable pavers. And so here is the bioswale that sits in the front of the building. So they had a similar design concept, a dry river rock bed with a few scattered plants. And then, and what's really great about this project is they had an older tree out front that they wanted to save. So we literally just took our bioswale and kind of wrapped it around the tree. So you can kind of see there where the bioswale kind of goes around the tree. And you don't see that very often, but that's kind of cool how they were able to do that. And then here's the permeable pavers. So what you see here is the pavers are kind of like your drainage inlet. So all that water that comes off the concrete will drain through the pavers. And these are open joint pavers, so they infiltrate pretty quick. And then the aggregate base that sits below the concrete and the pavers is your detention. So rather than doing like a underground detention system, whether it's a chamber or a modular box system, what we have here is we just took all the voids in the rock and used it for subsurface storage. So it's a pretty unique application. And at the end of the day, we cut the cost of the overall stormwater management rather than doing an underground detention system. Because even though these pavers cost more per square foot to install than traditional concrete, you know, say traditional concrete $6 a square foot, and these are 10. Well, you're only paying an additional $4 a square foot for those pavers, but also we're not having to put as many drainage inlets because these infiltrate so quickly. We could probably have one drainage inlet for that whole parking lot rather than 2 or 3. And so you have to kind of back out the other traditional infrastructure costs you would have put in place. And so when you're running these budgets, you have to kind of consider that. Otherwise, a lot of times they think, oh, I see permeable pavers, that automatically costs more than traditional concrete. But no, we're getting cost savings in other areas. All right, we got some questions here. See if I can answer these real quick. So these look great on a pre-development side of things. What is your experience with post-development retrofit installation? We tried one of there and there was a little bit pushback from the residents. Yeah, retrofits are great. There's a lot of good case studies in New Orleans, where I'm from, and then up and also in the Northeast area, they do tons of retrofits. But yeah, whenever you're doing it with when you have residential input, it can be somewhat of a challenge. But I've actually seen a lot of good case studies where we're able to get those. So we also got a rain guardian turret system is a great alternate to traditional curb inlet designs. Yeah, so there are all types of different types of inlet structures for curb cuts. So if you do get a lot of flow, you can use, like I've seen the rain guardian turret. We just installed one of those on a project. Those work great. And there's some other ones that you can do. So those are really great when you have a lot of flow coming into one inlet. Do you find landscape fabric in bioswales? Does it hinder bioinfiltration? So that's a good question. So the type of fabric we use is a high flow fabric. So you can actually, the fabric will separate your layers, but it's also very permeable. So no, it does not affect the infiltration into your whether it's a groundwater table or whatever it is. It does not do that. And do you find herbicides such as Roundup being used in the rock line ditch? I don't know the answer to that. I'm pretty sure they use some type of herbicide, but I would not recommend Roundup. We all know the issues with glyphosates. And we got another question from Scott. For this site, is there an eventual small diameter discharge pipe that leaves the site? So yeah, what we do is when you do bioretention, you'll typically have an overflow structure set up high, and the bioretention system itself is like your restrictor. So yes, You'll either have a weir structure if you don't have bioretention, if it's just a, your traditional pipe structure. But yeah, you could also do the bioretention as your restrictor. And yeah, we also have a performance guarantee for these bioretention systems. So we actually had to go out and do an infiltration test on these bioswales to make sure they were actually working. So that was good value to the owner. They, obviously if you get these installed, there's a chance they can get clogged with construction sediment. So we do provide infiltration tests. So on these pavers you see here, I believe we have to meet at least 1,000 inches an hour. And then on the engineered soil systems with the bioretention, it's 100 inches an hour. All right, good questions. All right, let's move on. So here's some other good case studies. This one's actually up in North Texas, and it's a 7-Eleven gas station. And we were doing a lot of these projects up in North Texas, and we were doing some underground detention systems. And we had one particular project where the engineer reached out to us because you look at the site plan, they really, they originally thought underground detention, so we gave them a budget. It was going to be around $50,000, $60,000 to do a turnkey install. And whenever the engineer was looking at it, she was saying, hey, look, we got all this available landscape. Is there a way we could do surface detention in these areas rather than do underground detention? And so what they ended up doing was she graded out these open landscape areas for like a 3-to-1 side slope. They had a flat bottom, and so essentially they created a trapezoidal bioswale shape. And in these, they had a lot of grade change. So these actually were fairly steep on some of these bioswales. And so what we ended up doing was the utility contractor came in and just kind of graded out these swells, created all of our surface storage. And then we came back and installed our bioretention system. So this is the high flow biofiltration system. And you can see on the left there, that's after we installed it. So you got your overflow structure sticking out there. And then we wrap it up in fabric. Obviously, we don't want all that construction sediment clogging it. And then if you look on the right, after it was landscaped, you can see they put all the sod next to it. We actually opened up that fabric, and then we'll add mulch and plants in there. So the whole idea here is all the landscape takes all the runoff from the pavement and the building. It fills up these bioswales, creates our detention, and we got our overflow structure there for our long-term or our large storm events. But we ended up doing this one for about $20,000. So about a third of the cost, we were able to do this because, digging out bioswales and installing these is much cheaper than having to excavate a large footprint, do a structural base, install these detention systems, and backfill with rock. Earthwork solutions like this can be fairly cost effective. And I will tell you, it is a 7-Eleven, so they wanted to keep their maintenance low. So these aren't the best looking bioswales. They're all grass with sod. But, at the end of the day, it serves their purpose. It's a low maintenance, and it was able to save them money up front on construction. And so these examples I've been showing you, these are really just, what's the value of bioswales when it comes to detention, right? If you have a large detention requirement, you can cut that down using low impact development. But I was doing some projects up in Fort Worth. So these are right along the Trinity River, and the Trinity River, or it's the Trinity River Authority, I forgot their name. They put a pretty stringent water quality requirement on all developments along the river because Fort Worth is trying to redevelop the river there. So they're putting up a lot of these apartment complexes and entertainment areas, kind of attract and develop that area. And so this particular project, the TRWD ended up forcing them to do the water quality, but at this point in time, the engineer pretty much already had a traditional layout. So it was all curb and gutter, and they had these 2 large outfalls that were going to go into a drainage channel that went straight into the river. So pretty much our only solution was to do these into pipe systems. So what we ended up doing was these large vault systems. They're called a nutrient separating baffle box, but there's all types of systems out there. And what we had to do is, we really couldn't do a low impact development design. It would have just taken too much to regrade the site, and they already had the building footprint. So they ended up going with a solution. And as you can see, these vault systems are very large. So this one in particular had a trash rack, a baffle system, and then it also had filtration media. So that was how stringent these water quality requirements is we couldn't just do trash rack and oil boom and sediment. We had to put a filtration media in there to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus. So nitrogen and phosphorus was pretty difficult to deal with when you're doing stormwater. And if you look at the price tag on these, it was very expensive. I mean, you're looking at a lot of concrete here. Those systems were pretty tall, so they had to come in with special equipment, some cranes to get them installed. And what's interesting about, doing these types of BMPs, they're out of sight, out of mind. So if you look here, this is at the back of the lot, a lot of people are going to forget it's there. You can see here, they're already throwing trash on top of the vault system. There's weeds growing everywhere. And so when these things are out of sight, out of mind, more likely they're not going to be maintained as often as if it was a bioswale that was sitting in front of your property, right? And so what's interesting about this project was the general contractor did not do any stormwater pollution prevention. So these were installed at the beginning of the project. So for about a little over a year, all the construction sediment, debris, and trash all pretty much ended up in these baffle box systems. So that's another thing you got to worry about. This is you don't want to fill this up before you give it to the owner. So before this contractor could even turn the project over, they had to spend about $5 or $10 grand just cleaning these things out. So that just kind of shows you if you're going to do stormwater BMP systems like this, you definitely want to protect them with your inlet protection. So this was another project on the Trinity River. They had the same water quality requirements. It was almost the same design. It was another apartment complex. But this one, we got pretty lucky because they already had some planters in the pool area. So this is kind of a rendering. But if you look, there's some green planters in between the pool and the building on both sides. So when the engineer asked us for a solution, we obviously, we said, well, yeah, we could do an end-to-pipe solution, but it could be pretty costly. So I think we can go with bioretention and save you some money. So what we ended up doing was we took this landscape. So I believe there was about close to 500 square feet in these stormwater planters. So what you see here, you can see some curb cuts on the sidewalk. But what's interesting on this project, most of the runoff came from the parking garage and the building. So we were getting some surface drainage, but we were more concerned about all the flow coming off the rooftop and the buildings. And so what we ended up doing was, this is kind of the plan view of the planters. We actually took the pipes coming straight from the downspouts, tied them into a small underground detention system. And we didn't do this for detention. We did it to help slow down the water because obviously we have a 15-inch pipe coming off the building. We don't want that going straight into our planter. And then that storage tank slowly bleeds off the water into our planter. So you can see the pipes connecting those blue boxes into the green planters. And then on the cross section, our bioretention system was the high flow biofiltration system we talked about earlier. And one thing that we were able to do with it is this particular design had a really good water quality study to back it up. So we were able to show, I think it was 50% nitrogen, 60% phosphorus reduction. And then of course we had our TSS and metals. So we had the same water quality requirements as that large baffle box system, all within these planters. So that was a good thing about using this design. We're able to get that water quality study to back up our results. And so this is what it looked like during construction. So on the left there, that's the storage tank. So that's where all the water comes off the building. It slows it down. And then you can kind of see you look in the storage tank on the left, you can see the 3 pipes there. So that's where the water slowly bleeds off into the planter box. And so on the right there, that's actually the planter box after we installed the biofiltration system. So what you're looking at is the engineered soil, and then you got an overflow structure way in the back. So once those things kind of fill up, everything will gravity drain and it'll go into that overflow. And yes, that overflow is above the planter, but we'll end up cutting it back later on. Let's see, we got some questions here. Is that Trinity River project in the floodplain? Are developments allowed in the floodplains? I don't know if it's in the floodplain. It's on the other side of the levee, but I don't know the question to that. But you can probably look on Trinity River Authority's website and they'll be able to tell you that. Do you have any experience with green roof systems? I've never done a green roof. I've seen them done a lot in New Orleans where I'm at, and that's always an option, but green roofs are very difficult to get developers on board with. But I know in other parts of the world, green roofs are pretty common, but Yeah, green roof could have been a solution that we could have looked at, but I'm sure the construction cost would have been more. So let's look at the cost comparison. So the View Apartments was the one I showed you first. That's with the big baffle box system. At the end of the day, it cost the owner $215,000 to get that system installed. And that was kind of like what they ended up paying. So if you look at the Encore Panther Island, which was the second project I showed you, it was almost half the cost. Because again, we're not putting everything in a big concrete vault. You know, we're just using a high flow biofiltration system. It's made of engineered soil, bridging stone, and under drain. And so we were able to cut down those costs a lot. And so what I wanted to show you here was low impact development can be cheaper, not just for detention solutions, but also for water quality solutions. Because it seems if you go look in the stormwater marketplace, everybody has a solution for water quality, but they always want to put it in a concrete box. You know, you don't have to put everything in a concrete box, you know, when you're doing these urbanized applications. They can be these landscaped or you know, kind of like these open areas. And when it comes to resilience, Matthew's going to talk more about this project later on. But this is a great project in Harris County. So I wanted to show you some of the resilience of these low impact development. This is actually a project that took advantage of a traditional design and also a low impact development. But this is what it looked like during Hurricane, what was its tax day flood, sorry. And you can see these bioswales, the traditional design, were doing their job, right? They're detaining water. And even during Hurricane Harvey, when they got, you know, more than 30 inches of rain over a 4-day period, these bioswales were still performing great. And if you came back, this is actually a photo my boss took. He lives nearby this development. And after Hurricane Harvey, he was able to see where all the water drained down. So you know, a lot of people think that low impact development can't handle the large storms, but you know, we're not trying to filter all that. We're not trying to get all that water to go through the engineered soil system or the bioretention system. You know, that's what the overflow is for. But these systems are resilient. They can go through these big storm events and they work great. So whenever you're using this term, you're trying to sell this idea to a developer, you know, don't call it low impact development. That's not the best solution. You know, green infrastructure, we like to use that term. What we like to call it is multifunctional design, right? People can get on board with that. And you can kind of see in these case studies where we're taking advantage of that multifunctional design aspect. And a good way to kind of show this is if your developer asks, well, you know, what's the cost of a traditional parking lot? And most paving contractors will say, oh, it's $6 to $8 a square foot to put down an asphalt parking lot. But what they don't remember is that what's the true value of the cost, right? Because it's not just the parking lot you're having to build, right? You have to put your infrastructure in. You need your drainage inlets. You need your drainage pipe. You know, the parking lot generates most of your runoff problems, right? You have to deal with that runoff. And if you're having to do a water quality system, you have to add that cost in. And then if you have to detain water, well, now you have to budget your detention pond. So it's not $6 to $8 a square foot to do a parking lot. It ends up costing probably your $20, $30 per square foot because of all these add-on features that you have to do because the parking lot just creates so many problems. So if your parking lot can detain water, it can clean water, you can park on it, why not do that versus a traditional parking lot, right? So these are some of the whys and the hows that we want to get across. And you know, when you talk to landscape architects or architects, they always want to say that, you know, they're always afraid people of driving into their landscape, right? That's why we put everything up on a 6-inch curb. But we all know that people will find a way to get over that curb, whether they drive through it or not. So one of the bigger questions I get with bioswales is, you know, are you afraid of a car driving into your bioswale? And so I just pull out my phone and I show these photos. It doesn't really matter what it is. You know, humans will find a way to get it in there. And then if you're in New Orleans, you know, we have cars in our landscapes in some areas here. We have cars in our drainage system. So this is actually a car they pulled out of the Lafitte Canal in Mid-City in New Orleans. This happened last year. And if anybody wants to wonder, you know, how do you date or time, you know, when this car was there? Well, we know it happened around Mardi Gras because there was Mardi Gras beads in the trunk. But if you look at the inspection sticker, it was actually, this came from Hurricane Katrina. So this car was it Hurricane Katrina was in 2005. So that car was in the drainage ditch or the canal system for almost 15 years. So if you guys think you have problems with stormwater in your area, just come down to New Orleans and we'll go find some cars in the drainage channel. So at the end of the day, when you're trying to sell this idea of multifunctional design, you know, let's take all of our runoff and put it in our landscape, right? There's no drainage inlets that you see in the parking lot, right? Because our drainage inlet is the landscape. And the whole idea here is to slow it down and spread it out. So instead of having this sea of parking lot here, let's break it up and do this multifunctional idea where our landscape is our conveyance, it's our detention feature, it's our water quality feature, and then it's also our aesthetic feature, right? You know, plants and trees do a lot for your development, right? No one wants to walk around on a parking lot just covered in concrete. And like I was talking about earlier, the whole idea of low impact development is just to stretch out that time of concentration. Because if you can take your time of concentration from 3 minutes to say 15 minutes, well, now you're not having to worry about detaining as much water, right? Because that water is taking a longer path to your outfall structure. So just kind of wrap up my portion here is we really want to change the way a region thinks about stormwater. So multifunctional design is a cost-effective, resilient approach to managing wet weather impacts that provides many community benefits. And I've got the benefits of working in Louisiana, on the Gulf Coast, also in Texas, and now hopefully in Arkansas soon. And it seems like a lot of the solutions that we use can be adapted to different regions. You know, they might look a little bit different, but at the end of the day, the design concept's all the same. All right, let's see if I have any other questions here. It looks like we just had a comment about the cap and seal technique. Yeah, in fact, anytime you do permeable pavement or you're having some type of stormwater BMP, especially in a landscape area, if you don't have it vegetated and you're worried about run-on from sediment, you know, those cap and seal techniques are great. All right, so I think that's my portion. I think now I will stop my share and we'll pass it over to Matthew.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. Screen should be popping up. So like Anthony and Becky said, my name is Matthew Smith. I work predominantly in the Houston-Harris County area down here in Texas on business development. Anthony's gone over a lot of really good projects, as well as a couple. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here in regards of the Bioswales applications on these projects. And a big question that we always get to is in regards to maintenance on these. So we'll kind of go into a little bit on the design side as to why a developer went with it, as well as why we designed it a certain way in regards of the maintenance. So the first one that I'm actually going to talk about here is the Burnham Wood Drive project. This was actually Harris County's first eventually lid roadway. What's really kind of interesting about this project is that actually they had first designed this mile itself. This stretch of road is about 1 mile long. Originally, they actually got about 90% done on the design side for this site for a traditional roadway. And then it was actually the county engineer that said, you know what, hang on 1 second. Let's just take a step back, take a breath, and see if we could do lid for this. It was basically this idea of, you know, we've been talking about it for a while. We haven't really have any proof of concepts yet. So let's see what we can do. Because originally what was going to happen is they were going to have this stretch of road here, normal, you know, storm sewer pipe, and then have to buy a very large chunk of land down here for a large detention pond. So what they did for this one is they actually ended up putting it in part of a contest. I think it was about 5 to 10 different firms of engineering firms go, you know what, hey, all of you have to do a lid design. Let's see what you come up with. All of the engineering firms, all but one, came up with a lid design that was actually economically cheaper than doing a traditional roadway. And so what they ended up doing is they actually put a median here in the center of the road where they depressed it down about 3 feet and turned those into bioswales for the conveyance and detention. And then conveyed the water down where it slowly comes into a very small detention pond down here at the end. And this is what they look like today, actually. These are very wild, I would say. What's kind of interesting is that when they first did this project is that they beautified the heck out of these bioswales because it was the first like lid roadway. And it was super nice. There was hundreds of different species of flowers in it and plants. And Then the county maintenance budget came into play. And the county, when they first come out to maintain it, first thing they did is just take that mower and mowed it all down, all gone. And so what they've done at this point is kind of just allowed native plants to come in because they were fighting a lot with volunteer plants. And now they're like, you know what, we're just gonna let natives grow in this. And they've kind of let it be a wilder bioswale or just a native bioswale, which has been kind of cool. So it looks more like this today. And what they've done to help promote, because there were some people who were just confused, like, oh, why are you allowing these things to grow so much? And they just put up native plants, don't mow. And so now instead of them having to do all this fighting on the maintenance side, they've just let this grow naturally. And they actually only come out, recently talked with them about a couple months ago, they only come out about twice a year now, and all they do is trim it back. And that's it, and they just let it basically take care of itself. Still maintaining the water, still treating it, it's still conveying it. As well as you can see here, what they have done on this roadway, or as you can see on the sides here of the curb, is they actually have false back inlets where the water will come in through the roadway, come in here, goes into the bioswales. You can see the false back on the opposite side here. This project actually had a 7% cost reduction per mile for anyone who is interested. Since this roadway, they've actually done over a dozen low impact development roadways. Where they have seen cost reductions of 7% to 12% per mile. We did have one that was like 75%, but that was because we had to deal with a bunch of pipeline easements, and instead of having to do all these extra culverts and digging so far deep, we were allowed to put bioswales running across the top. So it was a huge cost savings this way versus doing a traditional design. What's also neat about this one, so this project's been in the ground about 5 or so years. They've actually done continual testing of the infiltration media on this site. Usually when they first get installed, not usually, when they get installed, they have our infiltration media on this one was about 100 inches per hour. Over 5 years, that's actually increased. I believe the last they checked, it was actually at 112 inches per hour. Reason being is because of the various plants in the media. And so as the plants grow, their roots get bigger, which allows more basically channels and areas for the water to infiltrate down into the ground faster. And they're also soaking up and still treating the water, which is really cool because I would love to see any other BMP that over 5 years has actually gotten better versus this biological one, which was really kind of neat with this project. So a lot of times people ask whenever we have to deal with it, because I mean, I talk to developers a lot down here in Houston, and they're always like, well, I mean, we don't have a lot of space for it. We don't have a lot of room, you know, an urban roadway, that's, you know, easy to do, tons of area. Well, what about a, you know, street area? And so they always come back that, well, then we show them Bagby Street. Briefly showed this picture a little bit earlier. Bagby Street has shown a lot of different case studies, I think, over the past few years. It's part of the Midtown district, a very urban environment. It was part of where they were trying to basically have this increase. It was like a $25 million tax revenue like increase in the area, basically, really kind of sprucing it up and changing it. A big push for why they wanted to do bioswales on this one is that actually they were constantly having street flooding originally. One of the other bigger main storm pipes would get backed up really easily because the street was just basically rushing water in too fast for this site and causing it to back up. So what they did is they used these bioswales to help basically slow that water down and release it slower into the storm sewer versus just traditional design of just basically get it off my site as quickly as possible, out of sight, out of mind. So I'm going to pause that there. And so you can see Bagby Street during a rain event here. So what they did is they actually put basically these deeper, I would say, bioswales running along the side of the street. And you can see where the rain event kind of here on the side. And then these are two charts of just a couple 100-year rain events that it's been through. And then this picture on the right is actually post-Harvey, where the water only ever got up to about right there. You can see where the mulch line is. So really not a lot of street flooding anymore now that this system is helping making it easing up on the existing storm sewer entity. And so we ended up actually getting a quote from Marlon Marshall, who is the Director of Engineering and Construction of Midtown Redevelopment Authority. During Memorial Day, Tax Day, and Hurricane Harvey floods, Bagby Street outperformed every street in the Midtown District. which is really exciting to hear. But at the same time, though, if you've ever been to Bagby Street or down to Midtown, the bar is not that high just because it's a little bit older of a district, but still exciting to hear that this is making vast improvements to it. And so what ended up happening was a little bit history of this project is that we actually started the design about 2010. From there, about 2012, construction started, and then 2013, everything was complete. So the first year, especially if we ever do an installation of a project, we actually provide the first year free for maintenance, basically, to make sure, because usually in that first year, if something's gonna go wrong, it's gonna happen in that first year. So we wanna make sure it's all taken care of. Now, once 2014 ended, the maintenance was passed over essentially to Midtown Redevelopment District, City of Houston, for them to maintain and take care of. Long story short, for 5 years, these were not maintained. They weren't taken care of. Nobody did anything with them until about last year, where they reached out. They're asking someone to basically take care of them again, clean up any trash that was in them, look at the biofilter media to make sure it was still infiltrating correctly. And so we did. We went out. This is just a sample of a few of them here. I think there's about there's 20 to 30, 30 focal points or high infiltration media, sorry, throughout this project. Now, with all 30 of those projects, none of them failed the conductivity test. All of them passed the infiltration. The reason being is for the design. A really big reason for that. What we do for any of our bioswales, what we highly recommend is having sediment forebays, which allow to have, it's almost like a prior treatment prior to the discharge into the biofiltration area. So because we use a high flow media versus say a traditional design, the high flow media doesn't have to take up this entire section of the bioswale. This here is just regular dirt. Honestly, it's just a normal, I would say a sediment forebay or area where the water can come in, sits, and some sediment can settle in this area. The media is actually not even until you come to this small patch. This is where everything's getting infiltrated and taken care of. So from once the sediment forebays, from there, we regulate the flow going into that sediment area with either check dams, gaving weirs, vegetation, everything to kind of help just slow it down a little bit, or having a flat bottom even. And then from there, then using the high performance modular basically infiltration area for the water to go into and treat it. And that really helps seal this. What's also kind of neat with this project, just on a side note with this one in regards of maintenance, your planting really dictates how costly your maintenance is really going to be when it comes to bioswales. So for these, I would argue that your maintenance is a little bit higher because you're probably going to need maybe a gardener or someone who has a little bit more of a horticulture background, or someone who can take care of plants a little bit more, just because you have different types of plants in here. You have some trees, a little bit more vegetative. But on another note, with these hide trash very well. Like when we went down to go check them out for the first time, we were looking in, there's a bunch of bushes really kind of like covering everything up. And we're like, wow, there's really not a lot of, garbage in here. Not really taking it up. We're surprised. And then we actually got into them and like turned around, and oh my goodness gracious, there was a lot of trash in these things. And so we had to go in and we cleaned a lot of that out, which really hit it. Versus say a roadside bioswale or some of a more basic just sod grass bioswale, a little bit easier on the maintenance side. That's quick, easy, done with a mower. A landscape guy can do that easily. But you might have to go out there and pick up trash a little more because it's going to show up. It just comes down to preference and what your budget is, essentially. So from a street perspective, that's how we've kind of done a couple of different bioswales. And so then I was going to talk about a couple single family projects. One of them briefly saw a picture of, it was Camellia Residential. This was an 80-acre site where they originally were going to do a man-made lake kind of running through the center of it. Super pretty, not everyone's forte, very nice. And they were going to do traditional design, storm sewer pipe, very large detention basin off to the side. They got about 224 lots, essentially. It was actually the civil engineer. They already had gone through this conceptual design. Civil engineer was actually, was like, hang on, let me talk to the client. Let me see what he says in the sense of, I think we can be better with a low impact development one. And so let's see what we can do. Their typical lots that we were doing is about 50 feet by 110 feet. And they had an amenity on every single lot because, you know, the man-made lake, that was with this developer's motto, essentially. And what they did is they came back with that low impact development design by running bioswales and green space and rain gardens throughout the property. Their lot size are still 50 feet by 110 feet. They're able to remove that detention pond, and they got 323 lots, 99 more lots. The developer was very happy about this, very, very happy, and which is really exciting. But what the super secret is that he doesn't realize is happening on this one, and you do a traditional design, you're only treating for it is here in Houston, Harris County, you're only treating for the first ½ inch of rainfall. The problem with that is in Houston, most of our rain events are over 1 inch or 1 inches or higher. And so we're not really treating that much of our water. So a lot of, especially in Harris County, when they push low impact development design, they make you do the 1 inch treatment. The developer, when he designed this, he didn't even know that he was doing a better job and doing better stormwater quality. He is looking at the 99 more lots, which is exciting for him, but also for us on our side is that we're now treating the water and doing a better job of taking care of it, which is super exciting. So a big question we always get too in regards of, did we have a higher construction cost? Because now he has to pay for 99 more lots. Well, EHRA actually did a study, a case study of it, just to determine to make sure it wasn't going to be more costly. And it ended up reducing their construction costs by $900,000. Also super exciting. So their upfront costs got reduced, and they got more lots. Happy developer as well. So this site actually had a reduction of detention for it, and a big question we always get to is if Hurricane Harvey had an effect of it. And the answer is no, not a single lot flooded. Even with a reduction in detention volume, it still was able to handle a 500-year rain event. And so at the most, I think during the height of the storm, we asked some residents, it got up to about right here in the street, but nobody got flooded, which was super exciting. Now, in regards on the design side, one thing that did actually increase in cost is their stormwater pollution protection. It actually tripled. Main reason being is that when you look at this site, those rain gardens are bioswales, and especially in single family residential, these bioswales are in the center basically of everything. These are now basically your storm drain, your stormwater quality feature. They are in the middle. And if anyone's done single family design knows that usually goes in phases, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So as they design 1 or 2, those get inputted, and then on 3 and then 4, all that construction and sediment and grossness from 3 and 4 are going to come in and wash into the phases 1 and 2. And so we have to make sure that even during all the construction on these, is just they're very protected and taken care of. So there's a little bit extra. So with these, what we normally would do, or what we wait for, is that we wait for the site to be about 90, or the drainage area going to that focal point to be 90 to 95% stabilized before opening it. On top of that, for this site, what we also did is after opening it, we then also, just as an extra precaution, put a silt fence as well as some basically gator eels in to help protect it and just get it taken care of, just because single family is incredibly dirty and we wanted to make sure these were taken care of. Now, and that's one way. So then this is Stonebrook Estates. Anthony briefly touched on resiliency. I was going to talk a little bit on the design side of it because it's an interesting project. Because one, it's another single family project. The developer originally was going to have a large detention pond here in the center, and then have to have really very, very, very large concrete pipe going from here off site. And then from there, what they ended up doing is they actually were able to reduce their detention on this one by actually 40%. They were able to get a 10% extra lot yield. So they got all these extra ponds. They got a wet bottom pond here, all these extra lots. And then this developer or engineer, what he did on the design, instead of putting it in the center, he actually wraps it around the outside of the property. And so a little bit easier than on construction, because there is some storm sewer on this site. So a lot of the protection was kind of normal on the SWIP side. So that way you just protect it there. They go from there into the main wetland pond. And then from the wetland pond, they actually then fill the bioswales. Because what the engineer did on this one is he actually matched the hydraulic grade line across this whole site. So as a rain event happens, what ends up happening is the water will start rising in the pond first, and then the water will eventually then start rising in the bioswales all at the same level. So as the storm comes and goes, the water will actually rise and fall throughout the storm as the intensity goes through, almost like it's breathing, which is really kind of neat. Also, because he matched that hydraulic grade line, the water never got very high in basically outfall rates. So he was able to slow it down. So he was able to reduce this pipe size, this very, very massive pipe size. I think the largest pipe on the site is a 24-inch pipe. And what they're able to do is he was able to save them a cost savings on just pipe about, it was that one pipe from that pond to the outfall was about $350,000 that they saved, on top of getting an extra 10% lot yield. And so, and as Anthony showed, these are a couple of the pictures. This is not a crazy, insane, I would say, lid design where you see at a lot of trade shows where there's tons of trees and tons of plants, similar to what you see on Bagby Street. This is something an HOA can maintain and take care of. And to be perfectly honest with you, if you were to drive by this, you probably wouldn't even realize this was a low impact development site. I mean, I wouldn't, not unless I knew about this project. But that's the beauty of this, is that it doesn't have to be super crazy, super heavily planted. You can do simple designs to make it efficient for both the client as well as essentially the environment. This project was able to handle through tax day, which was over 16 inches of rain. I think actually it was 19. After tax day, the civil engineer on this got an award for resiliency award on this one. What's kind of funny is the civil engineer on the design is that the owner of the property, or the developer, got letters from the residents thanking him for designing it this way. Not the engineer, the developer, but it's still, I think it's just kind of funny. But yeah, no one got flooded here, even with a reduction in detention on tax day and Harvey. And another one here, as you saw, was 25 hours later. With it draining out. So the systems are designed to drain out within 24 to 48 hours. Biggest reason for that is so that we essentially prevent mosquito pits. We're still slowing down the time of concentration. What you can see here is, even though this is 24 hours later, there is still some water here. What's kind of neat about this is that it's still showing that we're holding water back and slowing it down. After Harvey, a lot of traditional detention ponds around here were empty. And so they weren't really doing their job, essentially. And so basically we're just holding maybe for a second and then releasing it all very quickly, which all the detention ponds across Harris County, Houston, doing that ends up creating downstream flooding. And so what at least low impact development does is it still at least holds back some of that water and still slowly releasing it out, as you can see here. So another one, industrial. This is actually our first low impact development industrial site in Harris County, which is super exciting. We haven't had one of these before because industrial clients tend to be very picky on what they do, and they're very anti-green infrastructure, low impact development when you first talk to them about it, where they have kind of a misconception that it's always going to be more expensive and super time consuming, basically. On the right-hand side, you can see this 1.5 acre detention pond. That was the original design. The site was about 13.7 acres. They were going to have to do, it was 1 acre foot per acre of detention going into this drainage channel in the back. However, the client actually went to the engineer and said, what else can we do? There's a way to reduce this detention pond size? Is there something else that we can handle? And so engineer actually was like, yeah, let's look at low impact development. How can we make a very basic low impact development design? And so what we did is we just did a bioswale, or a drainage channel, essentially. It's a very simple sawgrass bioswale. The high infiltration media is here in the back, so the water comes off the site, goes in the bioswale, it drains to the media, gets treated, and falls back into the outfall. They're super pumped about it. They're able to get an extra building, more land for storage, essentially, for their units. The project is still going on right now, but I have some progress pictures as it goes. So this is kind of the gravel yard getting laid down. You can see the bioswale kind of wrapping around the side. This is the media here at the bottom going in. And this is what it looks like today. We're still stabilizing it at the moment. You can really see the good cap and seal here on this project. I know it was briefly mentioned, we strongly push, and we are very, especially on the activation of this, is we really push for that stabilization to happen first before this goes. The cap and seal really helps save a lot of these bioswales, especially if you activate them too early. The contractor and the mud of this site will just come in and just destroy it real fast. And so we make sure that they are protected heavily. There's actually 2 layers on this one. Overflow structure is right there for this site. And then we have a bypass valve right there in between basically the inspection port and the outfall for the moments. That way the site is still draining while it's in construction. Let me see real quick before I go on if there's any questions. Nope. Awesome. I'm going to talk about Springwoods Village. It's going to be the last little project here I'm going to kind of discuss. I was going to talk about a bioswale project in Arkansas. Unfortunately, we have not gotten permission to fully talk about it yet, but what's exciting is there is a large bioswale project coming out there to y'all's way. So super pumped about that. Lots of one of the big reasons for it is for water treatment actually, and also for helping saving costs on storm sewer pipe. So in the meantime, I am going to show you guys another project that's very similar called Springwoods Village. That was on the north side of Houston up in Harris County. It is where the new ExxonMobil campus is. It's all the way up here. So if anyone's relative or knows where Houston is a pretty massive city. And so it's up here in this area. And so this is kind of a artistic drawing of what it looks like. This is a master planned area of commercial, the ExxonMobil campus, some single family residential, some very high end homes over here, some kind of normal, I would say priced on this way. There's a new theater over here, which is kind of interesting. In total, it's about 2,000 acres. At the intersection, you saw of 45 and the Grand Parkway, which is up in that area. And so what they did is they actually ran bioswales along Springwoods Village Parkway here. This road, which is East Mossy Oaks, there's the Energy Corridor or Energy Road essentially on this side, and then Holsworth, which is another road. And this actually extends even further south of here, which has more bioswales running through it. This one we were brought on relatively early, where they were wanting to find options essentially to do bioswales of what they can do. And this is what ideally we're going to be going up in Arkansas. This project is very similar, I'd say, to Burnhamwood Drive in the sense of it's much more wilder looking. They wanted to have this site look as natural as possible. There's lots of walkable paths, areas running up and down different areas. They actually have parks that run through this, which is kind of neat. This is one of the biofilter medias. This has been in about 3-4 years now, I think, maybe 5. Really kind of grown lots of different types of grasses in this area, which is kind of exciting. And see our inspection port is kind of almost hidden a little bit. And so for this one, similar in the sense of they don't do a whole lot of maintenance on these until they just come back and they really kind of trim it down. They kind of just let it grow. A couple of things on this one, because there were such long stretches of bioswales on the design side. They actually put these gabion walls at different sections of it for the elevation. So you can kind of see how the land kind of goes downwards towards that stoplight. And so if they didn't have these gabion walls, the water would be moving too quickly and they wouldn't have as quick of infiltration rate. And so what they did is you put these gabion walls to slow it down, and they actually have media on both each side of these walls. So that way when the water hits it, slows it down, the water gets basically pushed into the media down below. Before going into, it's like a rock under drain, and then that also helps filter, and it goes out into the local streams. What they did on this one too, to help kind of show like a maintenance thing, is they put this little grass that's about 1 or 2 feet where they do maintain this a little bit more often, and they kind of let this side of the bioswale grow a little bit more. So it still shows a maintained look, but they're still letting the bioswales themselves kind of be wild. And so they did this one a little more wild. As you can see, they kind of just let flowers grow or grasses grow. This one's a little bit different than Burnhamwood. Instead of having bioswales in the center median, they put them all on the sides. That way it just kind of will sheet flow off the roadway, hit that grassy little berm, and then into the bioswale itself before going into the panel. And that is going to complete my section. Is there any questions about bioswale applications on different types of projects? We got one. When they maintain the naturalized bioswales, do they remove the clippings? That is a good question. I am not entirely sure. I have not asked their maintenance departments that one. Honestly, I would have a hard time believing that they would, because it probably is more of a hassle. So probably leave a lot of it in there to help generate growth as that clippings decay over time. But I would have to ask them for sure. What separates the 2-foot mowed strip from the bioswale? Another good question. There really isn't anything that separates other than they just mow that 2-foot strip. That essentially I would say is just sod grass, and the rest of that bioswale is just stuff they've allowed to grow in the bioswale as volunteer plants, essentially.
Oh, also, Matthew, remember that 2-foot mow strip is the grass is actually grown in fiber soils, so it's a reinforced soil amendment. So you can actually drive on that mow strip and it won't rut it out. So it's
Yes.
similar that they do for like football fields and other landscape applications where you have a lot of foot traffic. So, so yeah, that mow strip is actually almost like a separate soil section.
Yes, thank you. Good point as well. Okay, well, I'm gonna pass it back over to Becky. And I'll let you guys handle it from there. If there's any further questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We'll be happy to help.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Matthew and Anthony. Those were really great presentations, and we just appreciate your time today talking all about these things. And that's pretty interesting that y'all name your floods after holidays. That's pretty neat. We might have to do that. So just to kind of wrap up here today, these webinars are all going to be on demand. So we are uploading them onto our YouTube channel for the Beaver Watershed Alliance. So you can check that out if you missed one, or if you want to share it with somebody else you think might be interested, you can do that too. And also, let's see, if you have any questions, this is my contact information, or if you want to learn more about the Beaver Watershed Alliance, please feel free to contact us. And again, we really appreciate all of y'all being here today. We will stick around for a few minutes here to answer any other questions, but other than that, we hope you enjoyed these low impact development series. Again, we want to thank the US EPA and the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Division, Beaver Water District, and Construction EcoServices for this programming. So thank you all very much and hope you have a great day. Okay, so Anthony and Matthew, y'all still there?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Good deal. All right, so we'll just hang out here for a minute, see if there's any last minute questions that come in.
Oh, so do you see where everybody's from? We got Canada, Maine, Arkansas, New Orleans.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Okay, somebody did ask if they could get access to the first presentation. Yes, if you want to just email me at this becky@beaverwatershedalliance.org, I'd be happy to send you links to any or all of those programs. We had one, the first one was all about permeable pavement. The second one was vegetated systems and native plants. And then this one as well, today's, so. Okay, guys. Well, I think that's it for today. And again, thank y'all so much.
All right, Becky and Matthew. See you guys later.
Okay, bye for now.
Yep.